Hello, Lemonsterites. This is your state representative, Natalie Higgins, filming once again from this very cluttered home office. We're missing our Leominster Access TV folks because they make me look so much better in the studio, but you get to see a little glimpse, a little behind the scenes of what it's been like being state representative during COVID-19 and working and doing so much of our work from home. And our typical August episode is a recap of the legislative session where Isabel would join me and we would talk about what the legislative session looks like. So we're going to try to do that, but as you'll hear from our discussion, nothing is quite typical during this global pandemic, and everything that is normal has been thrown out the window. And so, like so many parts of our lives, there's a lot of unknown, and that extends to the legislative session. So really thankful for you tuning in to our August episode, hoping to see you in person one day soon when it's safe, and hoping you're all well. But Isabel, how are
Yeah,
you doing? We normally spend lots of hours in a car driving back and forth from Boston or in the office together, and this is how we meet now.
this is how we communicate. So strange, I know. Yeah, everything's changed, but making sure we're all safe, doing our best from home. And it was an interesting formal session from home.
6 months. It's been 6 months.
Yeah, 6 months. So doing our best and hoping we can get back to a relatively normal world, normal life sometime soon. But keeping safe.
So let's talk about some of the changes.
Yeah. So we did formal session. We were in formal session a few weeks ago. We wrapped up. So typically, though, our session doesn't look this way, and we are in the State House in our formal sessions. So what is formal session and our sessions normally like, and how has it changed for you now doing it remotely?
So normally we spend formal session many hours between the House floor, our office, other meetings, popping into a lot of informational briefings to get us ready, just having conversations about the legislation we're taking up. And so I we don't even vote from a Zoom, right? Like this isn't how we're gathering for the legislature because so many of our colleagues, especially from Western Mass, who don't have broadband, we had to find a lower tech, more reliable way for us to communicate, and that is conference call lines. So if you remember, there's 160 state representatives across the state. They break us up into groups of 20. So there's 8 different conference lines that we gather on to be able to do voice roll call votes. And then if you're calling in to debate, you have to hop off that line, hop on another line. And I haven't gotten to do this yet, but I hear it's quite interesting, quite difficult because you can't hear on the rostrum line, the line that you're speaking from to be a part of the debate. All you hear is the music stop, and you have to assume that the speaker has said, the gentle lady from Leominster, and then I would start speaking. So you will often see, if you've gotten a chance to watch any of the formal sessions, you can still watch them on malegislature.gov. There's often a little bit of a delay in the speaker kind of getting ready and knowing, okay, yeah, for sure it's my time to talk. And so it's hard, right? So much of the work that we do is organizing on the floor, making sure if there's a bill or if there's an amendment we want to support or an amendment we want to oppose, there's often a lot of us collaborating with each other to work together. We don't get to do that. We can try through texting and being really prepared heading into session, but it's been really difficult because there's so much that happens on the fly that without being in the room together, it's harder to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, and
What about you for staff? Because
yeah,
staff are a really integral part of making sure that we know what's going on, that we're prepared, that if an amendment gets pulled for a vote, that we are ready to debate it.
Yeah, so the staff works really well together in the building in general. And so when we are in formal session, we typically try to get together and make sure we are watching session and knowing what's going on. And so we can help all of you out when something happens on the fly. And we summarize amendments, we summarize the legislation. And so when anything gets pulled, like an amendment to be voted on, we make sure we are letting the members know what exactly that amendment is and what it does. And we can do that as a really solid group together in the building. But lately, it's been difficult. We watch the session via malegislature.gov. I recommend all of you to watch it. It's very interesting to watch and see everyone navigating the new process. But ours is delayed versus what Natalie and the other representatives are hearing on their
to be clear, about 30 to 45 seconds, and it's different depending on your internet connection. So every staffer is getting a different feed, and we're piped in. So when we're in our conference call line, we can hear real-time discussion. So even if I'm watching it online, I have to have the online muted, and it's 30 to 45 seconds behind.
Yeah, so that's been really difficult, but we worked through it. I think we did a pretty good job as a staff unit.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it was hard, but doing what we can, the best we can from all different parts of the Commonwealth.
Yeah, we're really lucky that we have a lot of technology at our fingertips that we can collaborate in real time. Right, if you use Google Docs, you can kind of have a bunch of folks editing at the same time, pulling apart bills, doing research, going line by line through everything. And it's one of the most important reasons why we're a part of the House Progressive Caucus, because it sends us into session unbelievably prepared and ready to debate. And that's something that I want to make sure every time I show up for session, I know what we're voting on, I know all the amendments, I'm ready to be fully participating in that. And it can be difficult when it's just me and Isabel, right? It's difficult for us to parse through these really large bills. We'll have in times 500 amendments to go through. So to make sure that you know kind of which ones you're not super thrilled about, which ones you're really supportive of, to make sure that you're going through that. One really good change that I am incredibly supportive of and supported in the initial rules debate is a little more time for members and for our constituents to know what's being taken up. So having 24 hours to be able to read a bill, having extra time to be able to look at the amendments. They have to be submitted usually the night before instead of the morning of. And so these could be surprising things that our Leominster residents don't realize, that the turnaround on this legislation can be really, really fast. And it's hard for rank and file members who just have one staffer to be able to sift through this. So there are some good changes because of the remote nature of this, and the fact that we're all separated, that we have been able to have some major wins kind of in transparency and making sure that we have more time to look at this legislation, share it with our constituents, and get their input in real time.
Yeah. So every year during formal session, the Massachusetts legislature and the House of Representatives take up a budget.
Mm-hmm.
And so what has that process been like? What is it typically like? And where are we right now?
So typically the House takes up the budget first after the governor. The governor releases his budget end of January, early February. I'm on the House Ways and Means Committee, so we put out our own House version of the budget. We file thousands of amendments and then take up a week-long debate, which is the week after April school vacation. So usually the last week of April, we take that up. It became very, very clear this year in the month of March that we probably weren't going to be able to take the budget up like that, that it wasn't going to be safe. If you think of the membership of the House, there's 160 of us on any given day when we're taking up legislation in person. There are 200 people on that House floor between ourselves, staff, the clerk's office, the speaker's staff. It wasn't safe for us to be able to gather in that way. So we needed to come up with new sets of remote rules. We also needed to get an understanding of how much was our economy being impacted by COVID-19. At the beginning, we thought it might be somewhere between 2 to 4. billion. We're looking more like $6 to $7 billion now that we've got a real handle on how this is really impacting the Massachusetts economy. And to put it in scale, right, $6 to $7 billion out of a $43 billion budget, that's a significant hole in our revenue. So there's a lot of hope, and I think it's growing stronger that the federal government is going to pass, that Congress will come to an agreement on the HEROES Act, which will include significant funds and relief for state governments, for local municipalities, our cities and towns, for our schools, for lots of different areas, our hospitals. We desperately need that because it's going to be incredibly hard for us to fill that gap in our budget on our own. So we've passed monthly budgets, 2 monthly budgets, and then we passed a longer one that gets us to October 31st. One of the major concerns we had was, what is this impact on our cities and towns? Leominster relies on Chapter 70 funds, which are our state education funds. It funds about 60% of our school budget. And then also local aid, nicknamed like UGA, UGGA. It's unrestricted general government aid. And that's another about $7 million. So we're really thrilled. It took a little bit, but we pushed really hard. We didn't want to see any cuts to our education funding, and we didn't want to see cuts to our local aid because that's going to hurt our communities that are already struggling. So we were able to level fund our government, our local aid for the city, and we more than level funded our school funding. We adjusted it for inflation. So that was an extra $1.7 million in state funds for Leominster Public Schools, which is incredibly important, and a good place to have us at the floor, right? Like, we know we're not going to go below that. And so while we only passed an interim budget to get us through October 31st, there's a commitment between the governor, the Speaker of the House, and the Senate President that for that local aid to our municipalities, to our cities and towns, we're going to hold them harmless and we're going to keep that together. The hard thing is going to be if the federal government doesn't deliver on the HEROES Act.
Right.
We still have a $6 billion hole in our budget that we need to fill. And so we've got to have some really hard conversations this fall about how do we do that. And something that I didn't super clearly mention was typically we wrap formal session on July 31st. That's in our rules. We modified our rules. We removed that. So formal session can extend through the end of the year so that we can come back and vote on bills that are still in conference that we'll talk about in a little bit, but most importantly, settle the budget for the rest of this fiscal year that runs through the end of June of next year. We need some stability, and we've been able to level fund everything for now, and we're trying to be cautiously optimistic, but we know that that's not enough, that costs go up, that need goes up, and that because of this COVID-19 crisis, there has been a need for more supports like health insurance, like the Commonwealth Connector and Mass Health, food assistance. Yeah. There's so many things that we just can't cut that we really need to continue, and we're working really hard to make sure that we're getting clarity as early as we possibly can, but also planning and trying to figure out how do we respond to this.
So you touched upon some legislation that was passed this session. So what are some big highlights of some legislation of your own and some that were just passed in the legislature this session?
Isabel and I worked super hard, and I'm so glad to have been brought in on this collaboration to pass a ban on female genital mutilation and cutting. This is something that people are really surprised to find out Massachusetts didn't have a ban on this. It was a much harder effort than I think we were prepared for, but we were successful. We were able to get it through the House, and we were able to get it through the Senate and signed by the governor earlier this month, right? He signed it. We passed it before July 31st, but he signed it early August. And it has been, I'm so proud of the advocates that have worked across the state on this. It is a long time coming. And we're state number 39 to have a formal ban in place on this barbaric practice that really needs to be outlawed. And so for folks who aren't familiar with the background, we used to have a federal protection. It fell at the end of 2018 from a court decision and got kicked down to the states. And so it was really up to each state to pass this legislation. And we worked really hard to make sure that there were protections here, because we don't want anyone to think that you can practice FGM legally in Massachusetts. That is a really terrible precedent to set. So we're so thrilled to have those protections. And then we took up some major pieces of legislation. The end of session is always a big, busy time to wrap up some big bills. So we took up 3 days of debate on police reform that is now in conference committee. Some clarifying questions. If any of you have questions of what ended up in the police reform, there was a lot of misinformation between what was in the Senate bill, what was in the House bill, what was the process. There was robust debate of the vast majority of the pieces of this legislation. Many of the parts of the police reform bill were filed last year, had public hearings, and were moving through the process. There were a few things that were added, and we had a second round of public comment where over 700 pieces of testimony were submitted within 48 hours for the House Committee on the Judiciary and Ways and Means to review and come up with a bill. And then we had 3 days of public debate on this bill. And I'm really thankful it's in conference. I'm really hopeful that we can come to an agreement. So remember, nothing's ever finalized until we get it to the governor's desk for him to sign. And then he's got to sign it, or he can send it back to veto, and then we've got to send it back to him and override that veto. So in this case, and in a lot of the legislation we'll talk about for the rest of the time, we're in conference committee. So the House has passed a version, the Senate has passed a version, and now there's a group of 6 legislators who are negotiating a compromise between the two that we will all vote on to send to the governor's desk. And what other things are you excited that we worked on? We had so many bills.
We had so many things to work on. So there was a climate bill for climate change. There was a healthcare bill. There was, what else?
Economic development
bill.
Yeah.
So what were those, and what ended up passing?
Yeah. So the climate change bill was the last one, kind of like to close out the week. A colleague of mine, we are classmates, Joe Moschino from Hull, really worked hard on her 2050 roadmap. It's kind of resetting the global warming solutions commitment that we made back in 2008 and setting our targets to get to net zero. Really important bill, had some really great legislation, and Rep. Andy Vargas and I were working on some legislation to support low-income families in gateway cities to access solar panels, weatherization, other things to help your home become a net zero, whether you're a homeowner or a renter. And we were really happy that foundation of that made it in. It's focusing on environmental justice communities. So that includes parts of Leominster, parts of Pittsburgh, but it also brings in communities that are too small to be a gateway city, like Gardner. So we actually really appreciate that they took that idea and they expanded it to more communities and really targeted it within the communities to the low-income neighborhoods that could use these supports. The economic development bill is packed full of investments to really boost the economy, support small businesses. We were able to get $100,000 into a bond for Leominster small businesses, kind of storefront revitalization. It's a bond bill, so I'm always clear about that. It's not guaranteed. We got it in, so we've got the request in. We've got to get the governor to borrow that money and expend it and release those funds. But we're going to work with Mayor Mazzarella to do that and his team, because it's a really important thing.
And that was one of the bills with 500 amendments that you touched upon earlier.
Yeah. So right, like we all have lots of projects, and our communities have been very impacted by the pandemic, and in general, economic development bills are really great opportunities for us to bring investments home. And then healthcare financing was such a great bill, something that I cared really deeply about representing a Central Mass community is access to telehealth. And so we took some of those things that we did really well during COVID-19. There had always been this hesitation to do telehealth. Like, how do we do it? How do we bill it? How do we know that this is going to work? Well, we know that there's a few ways that it really works. Mental health in particular, making sure that folks have access to more providers because they don't have to travel as far. and making sure those providers are getting paid the same rate as if they saw someone in their office. Because when you're doing something like talk therapy and you have the ability to do video or phone, for a lot of folks, this is sufficient and much more accessible. And I can say for me, going to see my therapist, it's really nice to not have to drive there, right? Like, and I've even had appointments with my primary care doctor through telehealth, right? So some of those things are being extended and protected for at least a year so that we can work out some of those issues. And then we were able to get one of our bills worked in as a pilot for a year to protect elders and folks with disabilities to be able to stay in the community. Now more than ever with this pandemic, it's really important to help folks stay in their community rather than going into a nursing home where we're worried about spread of a virus within these congregate living situations. Right. And it actually doesn't cost the Commonwealth any money. It's allowing these community members to pay the difference, the little bit of extra in the premium, based on their income. So it's allowing them to stay in their community, thrive a little bit longer, use the resources that they have, rather than going to the more costly option often, which is kind of spending down your assets and going into a nursing home. So we're really thrilled about continuing that conversation and moving that bill forward.
So that was a jam-packed last 2 weeks of July, but it was really that came out of it, and helping us navigate.
We couldn't do this all by ourselves this summer.
About our 5 summer interns that we were lucky enough to host. Do you want to touch upon those?
Yeah, I know we're running out of time because there was so much to talk about, but I could not thank our summer interns enough for helping us sift through all of this. And they came with such a wealth of knowledge and expertise and background. And so we were so lucky. We had Adeline, who's actually a Leominster college student, who came and worked with us on a lot around our student loan borrower bill of rights, higher ed access and affordability. We had Nathan, who is a student at Holy Cross. They worked with us on the LGBTQ caucus and trying to find out a more formal process to track the legislation looking forward, kind of doing a backward snapshot of what worked, what didn't, and meeting with all of the members of the LGBTQ caucus to come up with a plan. And Nathan's still with us and working on this longer term. We had Kathleen, who was a Rappaport Fellow. I was a Rappaport Fellow in law. She was a Rappaport Fellow in public policy. Extensive work in homelessness. We were so lucky to have her to work with the providers that work with homeless communities, to interview some of our currently homeless and former homeless residents, to talk about kind of how do we re-envision solutions to end homelessness in our community. Amy Watson is not only a Northeastern law student, but a Rappaport Fellow in law, so we have a lot in common. She came with so much of a background in working with sexual and domestic violence survivors in her home state of Arizona, and it's been fantastic to work with her. And we're working on 2 new pieces of legislation that we're going to file to add protections for domestic violence and sexual violence survivors. And then last but not least is Kayla, who we agreed to host back in December. She's a PhD student at Harvard Medical School in immunology and virology. And we were like, what are we going to do with this life scientist? That's not really our wheelhouse. And who knew that we were going to have a global pandemic on our hands before she came? And she made all of this so much more accessible for ourselves and for our colleagues to really help us figure out how to take this on and understand what's going on.
So they were fantastic. I can't thank them enough. They were so great, and I'm so glad I got to work with them this summer.
We met every morning on a Zoom.
Every morning, 9 a.m., Zoom call to check in with all of them, and they were so helpful and so knowledgeable in all aspects of the legislative process for certain legislation, and particularly COVID-19, Kayla, so it was fantastic. And we had a really great, busy, packed summer helping constituents and all of this legislation. So what are we going to do next, Natalie? What comes next?
We're going to breathe a little bit in August until Labor Day weekend, and then we come back into formal session, and hopefully we'll be wrapping up these conference committee bills, right? There's 5 bills in conference. So hopefully we'll get a compromise, get those settled, get those sent to the governor's desk. We're going to continue to watch COVID. We're going to continue to be available to you, even though we're still working remotely. Like for those of us who have the ability to stay home, we're really trying to minimize the spread of COVID-19. You can reach us on the phone, 978-227-5278. You can email us, natalie.higgins@mahouse.gov. We've moved our office hours online because for the foreseeable future, we're not going to be able to have our office hours in the Leominster Public Library. If you're interested in hopping on a Zoom or hopping on a phone call, you just have to call or email us, and we're happy to set those up. Still Monday nights from 5 to 7, Friday mornings from 7 to 8. Folks have been using them. They've been really great. But if you're having issues with health insurance, unemployment, because there's still a lot of unemployment issues out there. If you're struggling and having a hard time and it's not resolved, let us know, because Isabel has been crushing these and we want to help you. Your time is precious. Please don't stay on hold for too long. We want to be able to get someone to give you a call back. If there's anything that you think we can be helpful with, please call us, reach out. No question is too small. And I really want to thank you for tuning into our August episode. Isabel, is there anything I forgot?
No, that's our session wrap up.
Awesome. So hopefully we'll come back in September, probably with more COVID updates. If you haven't checked out the new mapping tool that the governor put out, it's kind of showing the spread over the last 2 weeks. We're not out of the woods, right? Like we've made a lot of sacrifices. We've got to put more supports in place for individuals in our community, for small businesses, to make sure that they can kind of sustain themselves through this crisis. But we still gotta be vigilant. Please continue to wear your mask when you're out in public, and reach out to us if you have any questions about some of the changes. These executive orders are coming out like at times daily. So if you have questions about what's changed, how is it different, reach out. We're happy to help get you the answer. So thanks for tuning in. Isabel, thanks for helping me for our August episode.
Anytime.
Okay. Cool. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you in September.